So our last section of macroeconomics and of globalization is dealing with South Africa's history in terms of trading with other countries, our trading blocks, etc. So it's important for you to be able to understand the bigger picture about this. It's not an essay question, and it generally does not get asked in paragraph questions. So you can expect to see it in the section B questions. They like to also have a look at South Africa's trading blocks and give you a map, ask you to name some countries, and ask you a little bit about the history. So I would say study this for short questions purposes. So looking at our history, obviously before 1994, before apartheid ended, there weren't normal conditions. Um, the international world had applied embargoes and bans on South Africa because of the apartheid regime. So in 1960, there was a period of blocked rands. Rands were not allowed to trade. And then there was the financial rand and the commercial rand. So there was a dual um, foreign exchange system. Um, so in the 1970s, because of apartheid, there was sanctions and boycotts against South Africa, and the UN made sanctions compulsory until the 1980s. So they forced countries not to trade with us. If we look at our import substitution history, we started off with tariff protection with the Customs Tariff Act in 1914. So this provided some sort of protectionism. Then there was the Second World War, and ISCOR was established. So it stimulated, the Second World War stimulated manufacturing and industrial development. And after the Second World War, SASO was established, and domestic demand was the main stimulus. If we look at export promotion in the 1970s, um, certain incentives and financial incentives were granted to reduce goods for the reduce costs for the manufacturing of goods with export potentials. In the 1980s, some quotas were removed, they were replaced with tariff, and there was a list of imports that needed approval, which replaced a list that didn't need approval. So in 1985, South Africa declared a debt standstill, and they restructured the repayment of foreign loans. The rand depreciated, and there was an extra charge of 10% on imports. In the 1990s, there was a general export incentive scheme, and this was to try and start industry developing to export goods. And then we also started um, South Africa's industrial development zones, which is our version of an export processing zone. The export processing zones and industrial development zones we'll deal with more in topic 10 when we do industrial development. So just understand that an industrial development zone is a specific area where they encourage businesses to produce goods in order to export them, and they will allow them certain discounts, etc., to make the exporting easier. If we look at protectionism and free trade, South Africa's been part of the South African Customs Union and the Multilateral Monetary Area. We've signed various protocols, mostly with the African Union and SADC, the Southern African Development Community. Since 1994, we've obviously also been a key player in developing trading ties with free trade areas like the European Union, NAFTA, Mercosur, and most importantly is BRICS. So you also need to know a basic description of our agreements, our main trade agreements. So that's what we're going to look at. We look at SACU, or the Southern African Customs Union. Current members, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, South Africa, and Swaziland. So South Africa and the other members jointly negotiate free trade areas with the rest of the world. Then we have the multilateral monetary area. consists of South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. Um, and then when Namibia joined, we became the multilateral monetary area. If we look at SADC, or the Southern African Development Community, South Africa became a member in 1992. The intention is to become like the European Union, so we must be an economic as well as a monetary union. Currently, we have the status of a free trade area, and trade should be fully liberalized. The African Union is a bigger union, not just the southern African countries. It's very similar to SADC, but it's a bigger area, and they have the same intentions, that we develop into one trading area like the European Union. The European Union, we have a free trade agreement with, and 95% of the EU imports from South Africa are free of tariffs. And then we also have Mercosur, a fixed preference agreement. So 150 agricultural credit lines are included, and that means that there's free trade with those. The main aims is to strengthen the existing relations, promote the expansion of trade, and eventually establish conditions for a free trade area between the countries. Japan and South Africa. So again, there's a trade and investment agreement between these two countries. Japan was South Africa's fourth biggest trading partner in 2011. And then BRICS. So members of the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So all emerging economies that are performing well. And what they try and do is they try to negotiate deals as a group rather than a country on their own. So those are all the agreements you need to know about. What do they generally ask? How these countries trade with each other, and who are the member countries. So don't worry too much about dates or details. They are asked in the shorter questions or the data response questions. So mostly section B questions. And that is it for today.